Okay, Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. In this fourth session, this is probably going to be the most complex of the sessions, and inshallah it's not going to be incredibly complex, where we're talking about deviation in Aqeedah. And I think it's very responsible of us to talk about deviation when it comes to Aqeedah, because if you are to understand the right belief in anything, then by default you need to understand what it means to have the wrong belief. The first point that I wanted to make for you guys is that for every single point of belief that we have mentioned, there is an equal deviating point of belief. So if we said that Aqeedah primarily deals with Allah, His angels, His books or scripture, His messengers, and the last day, and Qadr, as well as some other issues that we said were sort of came about as those issues which the Muslims take and hold as their core belief, then for every one of these issues there are areas of misguidance. Just to give you a few examples, with regard to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are sects that were misguided in their belief about Allah's names and attributes. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that in a video in a few moments' time, inshallah. With regard to the angels, there were sects who denied the angels or interpreted them to mean something different. With regard to the books, if you look at the Quran, there were people who deviated regarding the Quran and they accused the Quran of being created. That's something again we're going to talk about in a little while. With regard to the messengers, there was deviation regarding to the messengers, regarding the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Either exaggerating regarding him to a level where he is made a god besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or lowering from his status to the point where he is considered to be insignificant. With regard to the last day, there is a ton of deviation regarding the grave and regarding the day of judgment and regarding paradise and hellfire. Those people who said that paradise and hellfire are just imaginary, or those people who said that the soul is punished but not the body, or those people who said that there is no punishment in the grave. And likewise in Qadr, there were people who said there is no Qadr, there is no decree, and there were people who said that we are puppets. So they effectively said that we are puppets moving and we have no will, no control, and so we have no will and no control. Likewise, if we talk about the companions, there were those who cursed the companions, who expelled them from Islam. If we look at the issue of obedience to the rulers and so on and so forth, there were those who refused to do so, and they rebelled and rebelled and rebelled. And all of these other issues that were part of our Aqeedah in Islam. The point is that for every single deviancy, or every single point of Aqeedah rather, there is a deviancy that comes along with it. And these are just a tiny few examples of the deviancy that happened in these few simple issues. Now, to understand this deviancy better, and by the way, by deviancy we should all be clear, we mean that something that deviates from the teachings of the Quran, the Sunnah, and the understanding of the companions. So the companions understood Allah, or Allah's names and attributes, in a certain way, and the companions understood the angels in a certain way. And the companions understood the Quran in a certain way. And they understood the Prophet ﷺ in a certain way. And they understand the grave and the Day of Judgment and paradise and hellfire in a certain way. And they understood Qadr in a certain way. We've already heard the hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar in Qadr, radiallahu anhuma, where he says that, I've heard two people come to him and they say to him, "Oh Abdullah ibn Umar, there are some people who have appeared in our lands and they say that there is no Qadr. And that this matter of ours is just random. All of the events that happen are random and Allah doesn't know what's going to happen next." So Abdullah ibn Umar said, if you meet them, then tell them that I am free from their belief, or I'm free from them and they are free from me. And then he mentioned the hadith of Jibreel. So this here shows that in each of these, for every point of belief that we learn from the Quran and from the Sunnah and from the companions, there are points of belief that people deviated in. And really the real reason these parts of belief are emphasized so clearly and so strongly is because people deviated in them. We talked about La ilaha illallah. There are millions of Muslims around the world who deviated in La ilaha illallah, who now spend their time making dua to other than Allah, praying to other than Allah, sacrificing to other than Allah, swearing by other than Allah, making the rain come from other than Allah, and so on and so forth. Millions and millions of Muslims around the world. And this is the reality, whether we accept it or not. We look around the world and we see that most or a majority of people in the world who attribute themselves to Islam are having problems somewhere in here. And these problems, how are they to be corrected? They are corrected the same way that the companions were corrected. How were the companions corrected? With the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. They were taken out of worshipping the idols and into worshipping Allah. Likewise, if we want to get away from idol worship and we want to get away from deviancy and all of these different things, then the only way we can do so is what corrected the former part of it, which is the famous statement that the latter part of this ummah will only be corrected by what the former part was corrected by. The latter part of this ummah will only be corrected by what corrected the former part. Meaning that just how the former part of this ummah, the early part of this ummah was corrected by the Quran and the Sunnah, the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, then the latter part of this ummah is only going to be corrected by the same thing. And the Prophet ﷺ said, بَدَأَ الْإِسْلَامُ غَرِيبًا وَسَيَعُودُ غَرِيبًا فَطُوبَى لِلْغُرَبَى. He said that Islam began as something strange. In the beginning days of Islam, most of the people found Islam to be strange, right? The Prophet ﷺ walked through, they said, "Why have you made all of our gods into one God? This is something strange. What is he doing making all of these gods into one God? Why do we have to worship one God?" Islam was strange. And now in our time, Islam has become something strange again. When you see a brother practicing according to the Sunnah, this is really strange for people. What are you doing? Why are your clothes above your ankles? What's wrong with you? You know, one builder came up to me, he said, "Are you wearing anything under this?" SubhanAllah, Islam is something strange when you see people practicing Islam. When you see a sister with proper hijab, even if we have lots in this room today, it is gharib, it's something strange, it's not the majority. So deviancy in Islam, in our beliefs and in our actions, because we said our actions are going to follow our beliefs. If our beliefs are corrupt, our actions are going to be corrupt. Islam began as something strange and it will end as something strange. فَطُوبَى لِلْغُرَبَى. Paradise is for the ghuraba, or a tree in paradise called tuba is for the strangers, those people who practiced Islam at a time when it was something strange, at a time when the people did not recognize it. Because it's easy to practice Islam when everyone in your family and everyone in the city and everyone in the country is practicing it. And it's very difficult to practice Islam when you're the only person in your family, or the only person in your city, or the only person in your locality. So we should be aware that this is not something that Muhammad Tim is just saying, like the hadith, "Man qala halak al-nas." Whoever says the people have been destroyed, he is the one who destroyed them. We don't say that the people have been destroyed. We don't say there's no good left in the ummah. There's a great deal of good left. But we have to recognize that the majority of the Muslims that are living today are falling short in this area, and we need to correct that and purify it, because if we don't correct the foundation, for sure eventually the roof is going to fall down. And that's what's going to happen, and that's what is happening in the Muslim Ummah today around the world. And we should not think that this is happening around the world because so-and-so didn't send any tanks, and so-and-so didn't send any planes, and so-and-so didn't do this, and so-and-so didn't do that. The reason we are suffering in this world is because our deeds are nothing. Like the Prophet ﷺ said, you will be great in number on that day, but your deeds will be like the froth of the sea. They're not worth anything. They have no value to them. And your deeds come from this. If this is wrong, your deeds will be nothing, and if your deeds are nothing, Allah will not help you, and if Allah does not help you, the Muslim Ummah finds itself in the situation that it finds itself in today. That's not to say that we don't take we don't do the things we need to do. We do all the things that we have to do to change the condition of the Ummah. But what I want you to recognize is that part of changing, in fact the most important part of changing the condition of the Ummah, is to correct what corrected the former part of this Ummah, which is its beliefs and the things that it holds true. Now, to better understand this concept of deviation, we have to go a little bit into Islamic history. And we're going to skip over the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, because everything there is rosy and good, and everyone is happy, and nobody is doing anything. The munafiqeen don't really have any control over the Muslims. They're very limited in number, and it's very, very, very simple. And then we get to the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And again, there are no problems, and everyone is fine and happy. So here we've had the time of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and then we have Abu Bakr, and we have Umar, and we have Uthman, and we have Ali radiallahu anhu. So, time of the Prophet, no problem. Time of Abu Bakr, no problem at all. At the time of Umar, the most significant event that I want to talk to you about is the hadith of Hudayfa. Does anyone know what Hudayfa was famous for? Hudayfa had a special job. Hudayfa had a special job. Does anyone know? Amen.
Did you know the secret?
He was the secret keeper of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Hudayfa was the secret keeper of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Do you know what else Hudayfa was famous for in that regard? What he used to ask about. He was famous for asking about the evil in order to avoid it. So he used to know more about the evil than any of the other companions, and he was the secret keeper of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One day, Umar radiallahu anh is sitting with the companions, and from those companions is Hudayfa. And there's a very interesting conversation which is critical to us understanding how deviation entered into the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Umar and Hudayfa and some of the other companions are sitting there, and Umar says to them, do any of you know the hadith of the trials and tribulations? And one of them replies, a tribulation of a man is in his family and in his wealth and so on. And Umar says, no, it's not this trial that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the trial that comes like the waves of the sea. That crushes you like the waves of the sea. So Umar has in his mind a trial that will come in the future. And this trial is something that is going to crush the Muslims like the waves of the sea, like a tsunami. And Hudayfa speaks up, and he says, O Amirul Mu'mineen, O Chief of the Believers, this has nothing to do with you. Between you and it is a closed door. So at this point, Hudayfa knows what Umar radiallahu anhu is talking about, and Hudayfa seeks to ease his fear. And he says, O Amir al-Mu'mineen, this is nothing for you to worry about. This is not going to happen in your lifetime. Between you and it is a closed door. And so it just so happens that this secret is shared between Umar and Hudayfa. So Umar tests Hudayfa in his knowledge, and he says, O Hudayfa, will the door be broken or will it be opened? Between you and it is a closed door. Umar says to him, will the door be opened or will it be broken? And Hudayfa says, it will be broken, it will be smashed into pieces. And Umar says, then it will never be closed again. And the conversation stops. So Umar says, it will never be closed again, and the conversation stops. The rest of the companions, like many of you in this room, are going, I have no idea what those two just said. They just had a conversation between each other about a door that is going to be broken, and not during the life of Umar. And this door that is broken will never be put back again. And they left and they said to Hudayfa, what was the door? And Hudayfa said, the door was Umar. Hudayfa said, the door was Umar. Can I switch this back on? Okay. Hudayfa said, the door was Umar. So what do you think this event was talking about? The death of Umar. So the Prophet ﷺ had foretold to Umar and to Hudayfa that Umar would be assassinated. Meaning it will be broken and it will never be. It's not that they will overrun Umar and he will recover the caliphate. It's not that they will conquer him and he will then rise back with an army and take back the land. The door is not closed and open, it will be smashed. Umar will die, and after Umar dies, Umar is the door that is holding back the great fitna that comes like a tsunami. So there is a great trial that is coming like a tsunami, and it's banging against the door, but Umar is the door. And eventually it's going to smash down the door. And as is found in the hadith of Hudayfa, and during the hadith of Umar, Umar is assassinated. Umar is assassinated in the masjid when he is praying Salat al-Fajr, and he is assassinated by a Persian slave with a double-edged knife who goes cutting through the companions one by one and stabbing them until he gets to Umar and he stabs Umar in the stomach, and then he leaves Umar to die, and the other companions throw a cloak over him and they jump on top of him and they wrestle him to the ground. And Umar says his famous statements when he says, who killed me? And he said that it was Abu Lu'lu, the Persian slave, and he says, Alhamdulillah, the one who caused a non-Muslim to kill me. Meaning that I wasn't killed because I'd oppressed a Muslim who was angry with me, or because I'd done something to take someone's wealth, or I judged unfairly. I was killed by someone who hated me and hated Islam. So he praised Allah for that, and then he made his famous statement, or before that, about the prayer, saying that you haven't missed the prayer, you haven't missed the prayer. And they said that no, they had completed the prayer, and he was taken to his room, and he sent his son Abdullah to seek permission to be buried next to his two companions in the house of Aisha radiallahu anha. And Aisha said her famous statement that I have preferred Umar over myself this day, and so on and so forth to the end of the hadith. In reality, when we look at the life of Umar, we see that Umar was constantly blocking the attempts of the munafiqeen. So every attempt the munafiqeen used to attack Islam, Umar was there, blocking it. Allah made him the door that blocked this trial. The time of Uthman came and the doors were open. What happened was the munafiqeen, they felt a massive relief by the death of Umar. They thought the death of Umar was such a relief and such a wonderful thing that they were able to really make their plans come into fruition. And they were really able to make their plans start and be able to make their situation work. So they began, and I'm going to just summarize this for you because we really only have a few minutes to talk about this. What happened was, they began spreading rumors about Uthman in the areas outside of the center of Islam. In Egypt, in Iraq, in areas which were not the center of Islam. Not Makkah and Medina where Islam was strong and there were many companions, but in the faraway regions of Islam. And they convinced the people that Uthman was an apostate, he left Islam, and that Uthman was preferring his family members over other people in judging. And that Uthman had imprisoned many of the people who disagreed with him, and that he was a tyrant that should be killed. Towards the end of the life of Uthman, these armies came together and they charged upon Medina. At this time, the Muslim army is all out fighting in other lands. There's no army in Medina. And so Uthman and Ali radiallahu anh, hand in hand, they go out and they talk to this army, and they say to the people in this army that actually what you've heard is complete rubbish. Here's Ali, he's witnessing for me. We're all fine. I haven't left Islam. I haven't imprisoned anyone. Everything is fine. No problem. They say, we're really sorry for the misunderstanding, and they turn around and they head back to their own country. When the munafiqeen and the leader of them, Abdullah ibn Saba, was a figure called Abdullah ibn Saba. When Abdullah ibn Saba hears of this, he needs a plan, because it's about to fail miserably. Things are about to fail really bad. He's got all these people to charge to attack Uthman, and now they're all turning away and saying, yeah, actually we made a mistake, sorry, we heard a rumor, our fault, my bad, I'm going back. So off they go. What Abdullah ibn Saba does is he sends a messenger from the munafiqeen dressed as one of the messengers of Uthman, and he makes him ride through the army that is leaving, backwards and forwards. Now what's going to happen if he keeps cutting over the path of the army? Eventually he's going to be stopped. So this army that's retreating, they stop this man who was sent by the munafiqeen, and they say, why are you here? What does he do? He says, nothing at all, to try to make it out that he has got something with him. So they say, we're going to search you, and then he says, please don't search me, please don't search me. And it's done in a way, it's a complete act. It's put on in order that they search him. They search him, and what do they find? They find a letter signed in Uthman's name saying to kill every single leader of the rebellion that came to Uthman, and to imprison the rest. And this letter is addressed to the ruler of each group's city that they came from. So the group that came from Egypt, it says to the rulers of Egypt, please kill so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, and imprison the rest. These people are very foolish. They're stupid people. They don't have a lot of brain capacity. So they believe this messenger, and he's a very good actor. They believe him, and they return back. Of course, these are not companions. These are people who've come into Islam much later, from those people who met the companions, and they return back furious with Uthman that Uthman has betrayed them. Then they surround the house of Uthman, and eventually, Ali radiallahu anh offers to defend him. Abu Hurairah offered to defend him. Many of the companions came and they offered to defend him. But what happened was, in the end, they spilled it on the first ayah that Uthman radiallahu anh wrote for the Prophet ﷺ, فَسَيَكْفِيكَهُمُ اللَّهُ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will suffice you against them. And it was known, the Prophet ﷺ said, Uthman will enter Jannah because of a tribulation that will afflict him. Now what to do? The army is in control of Medina. The Sahaba are under guard. None of them can do anything. These people, they come to Ali radiallahu anh, because part of the rumor is that Ali is the real ruler. Ali should be the real ruler. Ali is the right guy. Uthman disbelieved. Uthman left Islam. And so they come to Ali. And they say to Ali, "Oh Ali, we want you to be the ruler." Ali says, "No." He says, "You people have come, you've conquered Medina, you've captured us, you've killed these people, I'm not going to be your ruler." They say, "If you do not accept to be our ruler, we are going to slaughter the inhabitants of Medina one by one until you accept." So Ali says, "To save the blood of the Muslims, I will accept. I am your ruler." Now, what this does is, this instigates the very beginning of innovations in Islam. It shows what? It shows a beginning of spreading lies and rumors about the companions. It shows a beginning of rebelling against those in authority. So it shows us the beginning of two groups. It shows us the beginning of the Shia in the exaggeration of Ali radiallahu anh, and it shows us the beginning of the Khawarij, those people who rebelled against those in authority time and time again. Just the beginning. It doesn't show us the real establishment. Now the family of Uthman, we said who did we mention was from the family of Uthman? Muawiyah radiallahu anhu. Muawiyah was one of the closest family members to Uthman. He came to Ali and he said, I have come to you as the ruler for you to give me to execute the people who executed my cousin. I want my retribution. I want them to be caught and imprisoned, and I want their lives to be taken for the fact that they took the life of Uthman. Ali says no. Why does he say no? Because he says, if I do that, first of all, they are mixed into the army, I can't tell where they are. Second of all, if I do that, they will begin to kill the people in Medina. I can't do it. I have no ability to do it. I agree with you. They should be killed, but I can't physically kill them. So Muawiyah says, that's fine. I'm not going to obey you until you give me my right in Islam. And Ali says, that's fine. I can't give you your right in Islam. And so one goes over to one way and one goes over to the other. Muawiyah stays in Syria and he continues to demand justice for Uthman, and Ali radiallahu anhu remains in Makkah and Medina, and he continues to wish for justice for Uthman but to claim that he can't. The Sahaba took various different positions on the issue. This was not an issue of disbelief and belief. Some of the Sahaba said that Muawiyah was right to do what he did and we have to have justice for Uthman, and from those Sahaba was Aisha radiallahu anha. She said, if we allow the people to do what they have done to Uthman, who will they do it to next? Ali. Who is the next person who's going to be killed? And in reality, who was the next person to be killed? Ali radiallahu anhu. So Aisha was fearing over the well-being of Ali radiallahu anhu, and she said, if we set this precedent in the ummah, every single group will just come and kill every ruler they don't like. We have to make a stand. And another group said, no, Ali is right, we shouldn't be making a stand, too many people will be killed, we're going to have to leave it. The critical thing here is that this is a matter of ijtihad. It is a matter of coming to the truth with your knowledge of Islam. It's not a clear matter of halal and haram. It's not a clear matter of halal and haram. One group says it's better for us to take retribution and set an example and say, we're not going to let you come and kill our rulers. And another group says, no, it's better for us to wait and take the right time. That's not to say both of them were right, but that's to say that neither of them were doing it in order to disobey Allah. Neither of them were doing it. Muawiyah did not want to be the Khalifa. He didn't want to be in charge. He said that I can't just push this under the rug and say to you nothing's wrong when my own blood has been slaughtered so like this. I'm not going to accept it. We can't do this. You have to give us justice. Ali radiallahu anhu says, I want to give you justice but I can't. So the two disagree. And the companions meet on different sides. What do the munafiqeen take the next opportunity to do? To attack each side from the other side. So Aisha radiallahu anha decides she's going to go and make peace. She says, as the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I'm going to go and I'm going to make peace between Ali and between Muawiyah and the people who are with him. So she goes and she says that she wants to make peace. Again, just like when Ali and Uthman met the people at the time of the army coming to Medina, the munafiqeen start to panic. If Aisha is successful, their whole plan will be ruined. And they'll realize that the two of them will come together. By this time the Muslim army has come back. And the Muslim army is with Aisha. So imagine the Muslim army comes back from jihad. What's happened? Uthman's been killed. Ali is in charge. Ali needs help to get these people out of his army. No problem, we'll help you. Off they go with Aisha. So Aisha and her mahram, and her two mahram, or Aisha and her mahram, Aisha and her nephew are there. And likewise are all of the other companions who are there, and likewise the Muslim army is behind them. Huge Muslim army. They say, right, let's go talk to Ali, let's explain to him, we've got the strength, we'll overpower the people, we'll kill the people who killed Uthman, Muawiyah will come back, job done. They meet. What do the munafiqeen do? They infiltrate the army of Aisha and they infiltrate the army of Ali. And then they begin to shoot at each other from the opposite side. So the army of Aisha, or the army with Aisha, the Muslim army who returned back from the conquests, begins to shoot at Ali. And the army of Ali begins to shoot back at the army of Aisha. Both sides presume that the other side is fighting against them, and they all jump in. Shaitan gets the better of everybody, and everyone jumps in and they start to kill everybody. Until it gets to the point where two significant things happen. One is that the camel that Aisha radiallahu anha is riding upon is killed. And this is like a big click. And it just makes everybody wake up and go, what are we doing? We're fighting against each other. What is this all about? We came for a peace treaty. What is this about? So they all stop fighting. And the second thing during the battle is that Az-Zubayr is fighting against Ali. The two companions, from the two of the most noble of the companions, are fighting each other. And then Ali says to him, did I not say to you, or did the Prophet ﷺ not say to you, there will come a day when you will fight against Ali and you will be oppressing him? And he remembers this hadith, because he doesn't remember it at the time. He remembers the hadith when their swords meet. And Ali says to him, didn't the Prophet ﷺ say, you and me are going to meet like this, sword to sword? And didn't he say, you would be wrong and I would be right? And Az-Zubayr drops his sword and he runs out of the battlefield in obedience to the Messenger of Allah, and the munafiqeen shoot him in the back on the way out, and he dies. So at this point it becomes clear that the truth is with who? With Ali radiallahu anhu. But this doesn't mean that the other companions were wrong. They simply made a mistake. They tried their best to make peace, and they made a mistake, and the munafiqeen were there making the problems. But what that cemented forever is that there would be a group with Ali, and there would be a group against him. And the munafiqeen love to increase this up and up and up and make a big scene over it. And you know, whose group are you with? And so on and so forth. And so this led to what were known as the Shia of Ali, or the helpers of Ali. And they were not like what we know as Shia today, but that belief system developed over many, many hundreds of years. But at the end of the day, they were those people who sort of supported Ali and sort of showed a hatred towards Uthman and towards Muawiyah and towards those other companions on the other side. And likewise there was the Nasibiyah, the people who were on the side of Muawiyah, not from the companions. These are all people who were long away. And like football teams, you know, they grew to hate Ali and they grew to hate the people who were with him, and they made a fight between them. The next and the last event I'm going to talk about is to do with the Khawarij, and that is the eventual killing of Ali and the murder of Ali radiallahu anhu. And this happened effectively because the people couldn't stop with that. They couldn't be happy with Ali ruling over that area and Muawiyah. They couldn't handle it. They wanted more fighting. So what the munafiqeen started to do, they started to spread rumors about Ali. Ali's a bad ruler, you know, we should get rid of him. And so they conspired in the end to murder not only Ali, but Muawiyah, Ali, and their two main ambassadors that negotiated on their behalf. So they made a plan that they were going to murder all four of them. Why? To create instability in the ummah, so that there would be no peace, and then the factions within each group would fight each other, and the Muslims would be broken. And in the end, they were unsuccessful in their assassination attempts, except for one, and that was the assassination of Ali radiallahu anhu wa ardah, and this was at this time. In terms of our belief about this, we believe, like the famous statement, that all of the Sahaba did what they did sincerely for the sake of Allah, and that they did not do anything to cause hatred amongst each other, and they did not declare each other to be disbelievers. Ali used to refer to Muawiyah as my brother or my cousin in Islam, and Muawiyah used to refer to him the same, and the two of them, they had a disagreement based on what they wanted for good for Islam. But there were people within each camp who wanted evil for Islam, and they were the ones who eventually, they killed Uthman, they killed Ali, and they later on set the precedent of killing and rebelling against every Muslim ruler who does something bad, or who does something bad in their eyes, and they came to the conclusion of declaring the one who does a major sin to be a disbeliever. Their justification for killing Ali was that Ali had made a treaty with Muawiyah. They said, if you've made a treaty with Muawiyah, you've made a treaty with the shaitan, you're a kafir, we're going to kill you. And they said to Muawiyah, if you made a treaty with Ali, you've made a treaty away from the law of Allah, we're going to kill you. And whoever you sent to negotiate that treaty, we're going to kill him as well. And they said, because you didn't kill Aisha or take her as a slave, we're going to kill you because you didn't follow the law of Islam. And so this deviancy came about and it started to spread, and you have various different groups within this. You had those people who went to extremes regarding Ali, and that was extremes of love and extremes of hatred. And this love later developed into worship. So the worship of Ali that we see from the likes of the what are they called? The Alawiyah, the Alawites in Syria, like Bashar al-Assad. This worship of Ali, it came through this extreme of love and this extreme of supporting, until it became worship. And a hatred, until it became a hatred of all of the family of the Prophet ﷺ. And likewise, we saw from this come the issue of rebellion. And we saw the issue of declaring the Muslims to be disbelievers. Because of sins. Declaring the Muslims to be disbelievers because of sins. And so on and so forth. This group who rebelled had equal hate for the companions as this group. Don't think that the Khawarij were any less in hatred of the companions than the Shia. Both of them hated the companions one way or the other. So they began with hatred of the companions, and it went into worship, it went into all sorts of other things after that. And likewise, declaring the Muslims to be disbelievers. The same people today who say, this guy is a disbeliever, this guy is a disbeliever, this guy refused to help this country, he's a disbeliever, this guy shook George Bush's hand, he's a disbeliever, this guy did this and this guy did this. These are the same group who murdered Ali radiallahu anhu. The same justification. If you do a major sin and you're a Muslim ruler, you deserve to be killed. What did the Prophet ﷺ say about rebellion? He said, hear and obey even if an Abyssinian slave is placed over you. And he said, even if he takes your wealth and beats your back, do not leave obedience to him. And the Prophet ﷺ said, do not rebel against a ruler until or unless he forbids you from praying the salah. So if the ruler murders people, kidnaps people, drives people out of their homes, takes their wealth, steals the wealth of the people, eats the wealth of the people, kills people, murders people, whatever he does, if he allows the salah to be performed in the land, then our belief is he is not to be rebelled against. Why? Not out of a love for him, not because we love him, not because we believe he's a great Muslim, but because the effects of rebellion are far, far worse than the effects of obedience. Let's take the case study of Algeria. In Algeria, they had a very oppressive ruler, and thousands of Muslims used to disappear every single year, but that was a small-ish number. The Islamic Party, who tried to rebel against him, when the civil war started, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people were killed. Not just 1,000 a year, hundreds and hundreds of thousands, to the point where they said the streets ran with blood. After that civil war, what happened? Was the ruler better or worse? The ruler who came after the civil war was worse than the ruler who they sought to get rid of. In fact, the ruler who they sought to get rid of allowed them to pray, allowed them to call people to Islam, but he also used to kidnap some people from the street. So he was a bad guy, but he at least allowed Islam to exist in the country. After the civil war, the masajid were closed, the mosques were closed, and so on and so forth. And this is what you will see, wallahi, you will see a sunnah from the sunnah of Allah, that when any group of people rebels against the ruler who establishes the prayer, no good will come out of it. And that's why, look at the situation of the Muslim world today. We see that the countries are not stabilizing, that even if it's brought some good, at the same time, that it's so unstable, so many Muslims have been killed and continue to be killed. And that's not to say we disagree, but these are deep issues. I'm not going to say it's wrong to rebel against this guy or that guy. I have no doubt that someone like Bashar al-Assad is a disbeliever. You don't have, and he doesn't allow the salah to be established or anything. But the point is that this rebellion, when it is uncontrolled and it's not based upon knowledge and it's not based upon Islam, it's going to lead to something far, far worse. And we see again and again and again and again throughout history. We could continue for another couple of hours of rebellions that happen, dying, then coming back, hundreds and thousands of Muslims being killed relentlessly across the ummah because of this particular issue. And this was the feature of the Khawarij, who they used to say would come to the Muslims and they would put a knife on your neck and they would say to you, "Are you a Christian?" And if you said, "Yes, I'm a Christian," they would say, "You can go." And if you said, "No, I'm a Muslim," they would chop off your head. That was what happened in the early days. And of course from them, we know at the time after Ali, or during the time of Ali, we had the Qadariyah. You know, the people who said that there's no Qadr. And then so on and so forth, and we talked about the Abbasid period as well. Now, I'm going to take questions, don't worry, inshallah, towards the end. But I wanted to just let you guys forward through history a little bit to listen to a video that I think is a fantastic, fantastic video. And it's quite difficult to understand, so we're not going to listen to a whole load of it. But I just want you to listen to some parts of it, just to talk a little bit about what sort of happened, or sort of how some of the philosophical groups came about and what they did. Just wait for the computer to warm up. So this video, the purpose of it is to talk a little bit about the one of the philosophical arguments for the creation or for the existence of God. And it's a very, very, very useful video because it goes through some of the history of how the later deviancies came into Islam. We talked about the early deviancies, about how, you know, extremes, hatred of the companions on one side or the other, rebellion, killing the rulers, and, you know, so on and so forth, declaring the Muslims to be disbelievers. We talked about that, and now we're going to come to talk for the last half an hour or so, or perhaps 20 minutes, depending. And hopefully this has given you a bit of something to read and think about, and something to sort of encourage you guys to think about more, because this is something where you'll find people on both sides of the argument will criticize and complain, but the reality is that the Sunnah is the judge between those people and what they believe. Right, now let's see if we can get this PC projector to come on. It's warming up. This is probably the hardest thing we're going to do today, because it contains some quite complex. It's a video which is called Knowing God, Reason, Revelation and Intuition. Yeah, Hamza, let you do the lights.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. So the topic today is about knowing God through reason, through intellect, through intuition, and how various early Muslim scholars and philosophers and movements went about understanding this particular aspect of theology. Now, the problem that I had coming here is I didn't know the level of the students. I'm going to talk to a bunch of graduates from SOAS, I'm going to talk to Muslims who are interested in the field, and whoever I asked wasn't able to give me an answer. And so I'm going to speak from my heart, kind of sort of semi-academic and if you like, religious or Islamic. So I hope I don't lose some of you, and I hope I'm not too boring for others. I hope the majority, inshallah, are able to benefit and follow along. So let's begin from the beginning. What we're talking about basically is kalam, and the way that early kalam scholars viewed this field, and how those who opposed kalam objected to their views. So we first have to define kalam. Kalam is a science that is difficult to define, and it's been the subject of hundreds of PhDs and doctoral dissertations. It's difficult to define kalam from philosophy. It's difficult to differentiate the two. And that is why some of the modern academics actually conflate the two, and they say kalam is merely a branch of philosophy. And that is a madhab or an opinion out there. But in fact, kalam is different from philosophy. And kalam is dialectic theology. In other words, you are having a rational, cosmological basis of reality upon which you base your theology. So you base your theology not from texts, not from scripture, but from rationality.
I think we talked about that. I'm going to just stop and sort of explain to you, because inshallah it is a quite high level video. So the first point that he makes is to define this particular deviancy, which is called kalam, or ilm al-kalam. And he said that ilm al-kalam is different from philosophy in the sense that ilm al-kalam means to base your religion upon rational beliefs, rationality, and to understand the whole of your religion within a framework of rational belief. And he's going to explain a bit about how this belief came into being and how it started in Islam.
Now, how is that not philosophy? This is the whole question, because that is in fact philosophy. Philosophy is you base your ethics, you base your morality from intellect. So is kalam, except that kalam is kind of sort of in the middle between philosophy and pure religion or pure scriptural theology. And so it's difficult to demarcate the two. But there are many differences between falsafa and kalam. And we'll talk about some of them, but that's not the topic of this class. So I'll take it as a given that kalam is different than falsafa, because I think it definitely is. Kalam first began at the turn of the 2nd Islamic century. And generally, a person by the name of Ja'ad ibn Dirham is accredited with starting this type of dialectic theology. Ja'ad ibn Dirham died roughly 110 Hijrah, and I apologize, but all of them.
Okay, so here we're hearing about the beginnings. What's the first thing you notice about the beginning of this deviancy in Aqeedah? When did it begin? After the 2nd century, so after the death of the companions. So this is a deviancy that didn't begin during the life of the companions. And we're talking about the Abbasid period and coming into that in a moment.
I'd like to introduce that that's the way I think the road to Islam. To convert, you can just write the date and convert yourself later on. Ja'ad ibn Dirham passed it on to his main student, Jaham ibn Safwan. Now, these two guys were the earliest people who actually began talking about the concept of God's attributes. The controversy over God's attributes never arose before these guys. These were the first people to begin talking about how we understand the attributes of God in the Quran. Before these two guys, you had controversies over faith. What is the reality of faith, Iman? Who should have been the caliph, Ali or Abu Bakr? What is the role of the caliph? How about divine predestination? How much does God know? How much does God control? So you had groups like the Kharijites, the Murji'ites, you had the early Shia, you had all of these other groups forming. This is before this controversy.
So we've heard about those early groups because I've introduced you to all of those groups, the Kharijites, the Khawarij, and to the early Shia and how they developed. So he's already skipped over that bit and I've already covered that bit. What we're covering is much later. So that happened during the time of the companions, but during the time of Ali, during the time of Uthman, there was no discussion about Allah's names and attributes. Nobody said, what does it mean that Allah is Ar-Rahman? What does it mean that Allah is As-Sami' Al-Alim? Nobody actually had any issues with it. This issue started with this guy, Ja'ad ibn Dirham, and his main student, Jaham ibn Safwan.
Nobody ever talks about God and the nature of God. The first people to come forth with this type of thought are these two people, Ja'ad and Jahm. And their primary theology is very difficult to reconstruct what these people believe, because we don't have a single book that they actually wrote. And all of the material that is attributed to them is attributed by their enemies, either the Sunnis or the Mu'tazilites. We don't have any books that they themselves wrote. Even though Jahm wrote a few books, we don't have any existing books of it. And just FYI for your information, my master's dissertation was on Jahm ibn Safwan, and it is printed in Arabic. It is called, in Arabic, the theological positions of Jahm ibn Safwan and his effects on the Muslim Ummah. So I can talk a lot about Jahm, and that's not the topic of this talk either. In any case, so these are the guys that first start talking about God's attributes. Contemporaneously to this, there are other movements going on as well. And of those movements is the movement of, or the theological position of, what do we do with somebody who's a believer, but not a good believer? What if he's a Muslim but he drinks? What if he's a Muslim but he womanizes? What if he's a Muslim but he steals? He's a bad Muslim. Is he a Muslim or is he not? So the theological position of how do we define faith, what constitutes minimal faith, is going on contemporaneously. And of course, a lot of people are talking about this, but of the earliest people to really make a statement and make a scene is somebody by the name of Wasil ibn Aqeedah. Wasil ibn Aqeedah. Wasil ibn Aqeedah died, if my memory serves me right, roughly 128, I think, around that time. These are all rough dates, except for these some other about them. But Wasil was roughly 120 something. So Wasil ibn Aqeedah is really one of the first people to begin a movement that is clearly distinct from both Kharijism and Sunnism, which both existed. We should not.
So we know that Kharijism, or the Khawarij, we talked about, they existed, the beginnings in the time of the killing of Uthman, and then Ali. And then we said that what happened was that the Kharijites, who existed from Uthman and then Ali, they eventually killed Ali. One of the key things they said is that someone who is a Muslim who does sins is not a Muslim. A major sins is not a Muslim. So a Muslim who drinks is not a Muslim, and they would kill the Muslims who did anything in their opinion to be against Islam. Later on we have this guy Wasil ibn Aqeedah, and he comes and he defines a movement based upon what to do with Muslims who don't practice Islam properly. This didn't exist in the Sahaba. You didn't really have Sahaba who didn't practice Islam properly. You had some issues, but those were dealt with by the Prophet ﷺ or by the Khulafa. But when the Khawarij came, you're dealing with people who spend their time drinking, womanizing, whatever. And the Khawarij's methodology is that they are killed. What's our methodology, our Aqeedah? What do we believe? We say that a Muslim does not leave Islam by a major sin that he does. A Muslim does not leave Islam by a major sin that he does. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says Allah does not forgive that you make a partner with Him, and He forgives anything else for whoever He wills. So it's very possible that someone could drink alcohol, die with a glass of wine in his hand, and be forgiven if Allah wishes to forgive him, but he deserves to be punished. He deserves a punishment, but if he's not punished and Allah forgives him, that's up to Allah. What the Khawarij said is, they said, no, he's a disbeliever. As soon as you drink a glass of alcohol, you leave Islam. As soon as you commit zina, you leave Islam. As soon as you trim your beard or shave your beard, you leave Islam. As soon as you don't wear the hijab, you leave Islam, and so on and so forth. So they would murder people based on that. This guy, he established a different belief system based on the same issue.
We should not say Sunnism at this time, we should say proto-Sunnism, because the Sunni movement as it is actually developed after him. But proto-Sunnism and Kharijism are existent at this time. Wasil ibn Aqeedah comes and he puts forth a position: the sinning Muslim is neither a disbeliever nor is he a Muslim. He's kind of, sort of, in a limbo status. Manzila bayna manzilatayn. Okay? He's in a quandary. He's in a unique box. He's neither a Muslim nor a Kafir. Before this time, Sunnis to this day consider a sinning Muslim to be a Muslim. Kharijites to this day, there are still Kharijite movements, consider a sinning Muslim to be a non-Muslim. So this guy comes along and he goes, they're right in the middle. We don't call them Muslim, we don't call them non-Muslim.
And that's a deviancy like we've heard, because we said that the only belief that is acceptable is the belief in the Quran. Allah does not forgive you to make a partner with Him, but He forgives anything less than that for whoever He wills. So we do not say that the Sahabi who came and he drank alcohol and they said, and they beat him and they began to curse him, and the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, do not curse him, for he loves Allah and His Messenger. Do not curse him, for he loves Allah and His Messenger. This is a Sahabi who drank alcohol. And the Prophet said, do not curse him, for he loves Allah and His Messenger. And the woman who committed zina and she was stoned to death, and the Sahaba were cursing her when they stoned her, he said, do not curse her, because she has repented a repentance that if it was shared among 70 of the people of Medina, it would be enough for them. So it's clear that during the time of the companions, they believe that the person who does a major sin is a Muslim. The Khawarij come and they say, we execute anybody who does a major sin, they're a disbeliever. This guy comes and says, no, I've got a better opinion based on my theology from here or here, my Greek or my whatever he's learned from wherever he's got Christian theology. And he says they're not a believer and they're not a disbeliever. They're exactly in the middle. They don't get paradise, so they don't get hellfire, they get like a limbo state in between.
Okay, Wasil ibn Aqeedah is accredited, and I do believe this, to be true, with the founding of the actual Mu'tazilite movement. Mu'tazilite or Mu'tazilah.
So he's the founder of another sect. So far the sects we've heard about are the Khawarij, the early Shia, and now the Mu'tazila, founded by Wasil ibn Ata. And we've just begun to hear about the Jahmiyyah, who were founded by Jahm ibn Safwan. So we've heard about the Khawarij, we've heard about the Shia, and we've heard about the Mu'tazila. He's using English terminology, Mu'tazilite, Kharijite, but I think it's a waste of time, to be quite honest. Just stick with the Arabic. And then we started to hear about the Jahmiyyah. So the Khawarij come from the time of Uthman, but really were prominent during the time of Ali. Likewise, the Shia on the other side, in the time of Ali. The Mu'tazila came from this guy, Wasil ibn Ata, and the Jahmiyyah from Jahm ibn Safwan. And you saw the kind of dates we're looking at. With the kind of dates, Ali radiallahu anh died around about 40 years after the Hijrah. So here we're looking at sort of 30 to 40 years after the Hijrah. Here we're looking at whatever, 128 years after the Hijrah. And here, whatever he wrote before, we're looking at the 110 or whatever after the Hijrah. These kind of ages. So you can see that we're looking at something later than, than the Sahaba, and later than, the guidance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
He is the one who began the Mu'tazilite movement. Wasil ibn Ata did not talk about God's attributes. As far as we can tell, this was not a controversy to him. It's too early on. He's too early to really talk about that. But he influences his brother-in-law and his main student, Amr ibn Ubayd. Amr ibn Ubayd. And Amr ibn Ubayd died around 148 Hijrah. Sorry, 148.
So now we've got Amr ibn Ubayd.
Amr ibn Ubayd was the first person, really, to kind of, sort of meld these two trends together. And he brought forth a theology that included elements of God's attributes denying them, elements of Wasil ibn Ata's status limbo, in between the two statuses, and also another movement which we're not going to really talk about, the Qadarites, who were talking about predestination and denying it, or saying God does not know and control the future. So he basically took from Wasil ibn Ata, Ja'd ibn Dirham, and the Qadarites, and he took Mu'tazilism to a different level. He took Mu'tazilism to stage 2. And really,
so here now, we've added in the Qadariyah, who we talked about during the time of Abdullah ibn Umar. They appeared during the time of Abdullah ibn Umar. So we're talking still towards, 30 to 40 years after the Hijrah, perhaps something like that. And this guy, Amr ibn Ubayd, he feeds in, and this is critical that you understand this, that deviancy in Islam didn't stay like that. Don't think that the Shia stayed just preferring Ali over Uthman. Everything changes when it molds. People come and they pick a bit of this and a bit of that and they make a new sect. And they pick a bit of this and a bit of that and a new sect forms. So the later Shia are not like the early Shia. Here we have Amr ibn Ubayd. And Amr ibn Ubayd takes a bit of the Qadariyah that talked to Ibn Umar, or Ibn Umar talked about them. He takes a bit of the early Mu'tazila that Wasil ibn Ata talks about, and he takes the Jahmiyyah, denying Allah's attributes from Jahm ibn Safwan, and he mixes all of them together, and he comes out with the new Mu'tazila, or the Mu'tazila version 2, the new and improved Mu'tazila, with kufr from all over the place. They brought kufr from here and kufr from there and kufr from here, and so he made a whole new brand of kufr, the upgraded Mu'tazila.
In my opinion, Amr ibn Ubayd is the real founder of Mu'tazili thought. Why? Because Wasil ibn Ata did not talk about God's attributes. We don't really have much about him to do with other. It's really this guy here who brings together a number of different strands and takes Mu'tazilism to a different level. At this stage, we don't really have sophisticated proofs or intellectual theorems theorizing any of these things. They're just simplistic notions. Greek thought has yet to hit the Muslim Ummah.
Okay, so this is a critical point. At this point, there is no Greek theology. There's no evidence for this. People are just like, it's just some random twisted guy with some issues, and he's going to talk in a minute about where those issues might have come from, Christianity, Judaism, wherever. But at the moment, they're very unsophisticated. We believe that these Muslims are like this. We believe that Allah doesn't hear anything. We believe that Allah isn't merciful. And they just kept it very simplistic. They didn't really have any serious arguments to bring. And that was because Greek philosophy had yet to come in. Once Greek philosophy comes in, bam, that's it. Now they have all the arguments and all of the ammunition they need to fire at the Muslims. For now, they're outcast. They're one or two people in a sea of believers. But we'll see soon what happens.
Aristotle and Plato have yet to be translated. So Amr ibn Ubayd is getting these ideas. Where does he get them from? This is a really, really deep question. Interesting question. We're never going to know. How in 140 Hijrah is he talking about issues that are clearly Neoplatonic, clearly Aristotelian, but he cannot express them in Platonic and Aristotelian language because he doesn't know them, he hasn't read them. Where is he getting it from? I mean, the ideas are there. We're talking about issues that are found in other religions.
So you understand the issue here. He's saying, if Aristotle's work hadn't been translated, and this guy is quoting Aristotle, how did he manage to do it? He's not quoting him word for word, but he's quoting the beliefs of Aristotle more or less on the dot. And Plato and some of the Neoplatonism and Platonism and all the rest. Where is he getting this Greek theology from when Greek theology hasn't been translated yet? We hear his theory for it.
Cultures in Greek and Roman ideologies, but he hasn't been exposed to them directly. In my master's dissertation, just FYI, I propose, and this is something that I haven't seen anybody else follow up with, I propose another line, and this is something perhaps one of you can write a research paper on, because I don't have time to use things this room again. But Amr ibn Ubayd took this general thought from Jahl ibn Safwan. That's well known. Jahl ibn Safwan took it from Ja'd ibn Dirham. That's also well known. I propose a figure up here, which really nobody else had really concentrated on before, and that is John of where? John of Damascus. John of Damascus. John of Damascus is a very interesting figure, and it has been corroborated that Ja'd lived at the same time as John in Damascus, in the same quarters as John of Damascus. Same time, same place. But nobody ever said that Ja'd studied with John. I was really the first person to say that, and I could be wrong. The reason I said that, if you read his writings, and they're still existent. Now, John of Damascus was a type of minister to the Umayyad Khalifa.
We talked about this, how the Umayyads had ministers that were not Muslim because they were good at it.
The Romans are being given high positions because they're educated, they're literate, they're bureaucrats. And so the Umayyads come along and they take the Jews and the Christians and they give them high ministerial, secretarial positions because these guys know how to run a country. And I mean, not trying to be dismissive, Muslims didn't know how to run a country because they're new. They're just coming out of the woodwork, as they say. So they incorporated a lot of these people into the administration. And John of Damascus was one of the main people to be incorporated. And he wasn't just any Joe Schmo. He was actually a priest. He was actually a very learned scholar. And he was an iconoclast. He's very famous for the issue of iconoclasm. And he has many books still to this day. And he's the first Christian theologian to refute Islam. He has a book printed to this day, English translated. It's called The Heresy of the Ishmaelites. Right? Bid'at al-Ismailiyya.
So this guy, John of Damascus, may be the source for all of these innovations. Why? Because if we look and say, where did this Greek methodology come from? We only find one group who were learned enough to know what the Greeks were saying and pass it on. And that was the Christian ministers who were in charge of the time at the time of the Umayyad period. Now they lived in their own quarters and they were cut off from the Muslims. But Ja'ad ibn Dirham, here, roughly 110 after the Hijrah, he lived, and then he lived with this guy, John of Damascus, in the same area of Damascus. And John of Damascus was the first person to write a refutation of Islam, called the Heresy of the Ishmaelites. And he was the first Christian to write a refutation of Islam, the Heresy of the Ishmaelites. And he was well learned in Greek philosophy. And it's believed, or it's supposed, that John of Damascus taught Ja'ad ibn Dirham. Ja'ad ibn Dirham taught Jahm ibn Safwan. He formed the Jahmiyyah. Wasil ibn Ata formed the early Mu'tazila. The early Shia and the Khawarij were there. The Qadariyah were there at the time of Ibn Umar. And bang, Amr ibn Ubayd comes along and he rolls it all up into one. And we have the new Mu'tazila who have taken from Christian theology and they've taken from Greek philosophy through the Christians, and they've also taken from the Mu'tazila and from some of the other groups and the Khawarij and so on and so forth, and they found their own particular belief set. And this continues to happen time after time. These groups split up and they form other groups. We're going to watch 5 more minutes because, inshallah, you guys can get a link for this and watch the whole video. But I only wanted to show you certain points of how he describes this formation of this new sect.
It's like we're the Ishmaelites and we're heretical. The first Christian to ever refute Islam. Now his theology is very, very similar to Ja'ad in God's attributes, in issues of qadr, and even, and this is one of the main points that we're coming to, how to prove the existence of God. How to prove the existence of God. Because John of Damascus, in Arabic is called Yuhanna al-Dimashqi, John of Damascus was one of the first people to propose a very thought, which we're going to come to in a little while. He has a very rudimentary argument of motion and an object being motionary versus stationary, and the fact that it must have had a cause, etc. Very rudimentary, and it's in his books to this day. You still look it up. He has a book called Orthodox Theology, and it's translated into English, and you can easily find these statements in there. And this is exactly what Ja'ad said, and exactly what Jahm said, and exactly what Amr ibn Ubayd said. So I said it doesn't take a genius to link these together. Okay? But this is a theory because we don't know for sure whether these two met. All I could prove, same city, he was in Damascus at the same time, and we even know that he lived in the Christian quarters of the city, which is very rare because in those days cities were divided by religion. So for this guy who claimed to be a Muslim to live in the Christian quarters, I said, everything really points to this now. In any case, that is a separate thing. We don't have time to get into. Amr ibn Ubayd, let's get back here. So he really took Mu'tazism to a different level. And I would say that these ideas really go back to John of Damascus all the way down here. And, to make a long story short, this is, I would say, real stage 1 of formalization and crystallization of the Mu'tazili madhab. I don't really think Wasil ibn Ata had much more to do than the name. The name was ascribed to him, but in terms of the actual movement, is Amr ibn Ubayd. Stage 2, this is stage 1, let's say. Stage 2, you have a whole bunch of other people. Stage 3, a whole bunch of people. And stage 2, the main people really are Al-Nizam, and Al-Allat, Abu Hudayb Al-Allat. And this guy died around 235 or so, okay? Stage 3 are the Juba'is, the nephew and the uncle. And of course, Juba'i is the stepfather of Al-Ash'ari. Abu Hassan Al-Ash'ari.
So now we start to see a little bit of how these theological groups formed. So the Mu'tazila, they had another version and another version, and we're not going to worry about the people. But in those people that the Mu'tazila dealt with, we have this version, these two versions. We have people who start to be relatives or students of or teachers of other movements. The primary movement that we're talking about is the Ash'ariyah. And the Ash'ariyah represent the majority of Muslims today. The majority of the Muslims today attribute themselves to the Ash'ari Aqeedah. This is a fact. The majority of Muslims around the Arab world, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, the vast majority attribute themselves to the Ash'ari or the Maturidi or the Ash'ari madhab. Maturidi or the Ash'ari madhab. And these two were relatives, the father-in-law or the relatives by marriage of the people who founded the Mu'tazila, who were the relatives or the students of Amr ibn Ubaid, who learned from Jahm ibn Safwan, who learned from Ja'd ibn Dirham, who learned from John of Damascus. You don't see any companions in here, that's because there isn't any. That's simply because there isn't any. And I'm going to stop the video there and just finish off the discussion myself. Hamza, if you do the lights for me. So here we see how these sects form. And when you say to somebody, you attribute yourself to somebody who died 300 years after the Prophet ﷺ. And when we trace his lineage back, it goes from shaitan to shaitan. It goes from one to the next. So it begins with one guy. And his father-in-law was Al-Jubbani, who was another guy. And his father, he studied from Al-Nadam. And Al-Nadam studied from Amr ibn Ubaid, who studied from Jahm ibn Safwan, Ja'd ibn Dirham, John of Damascus. We're not seeing any sharaf in this lineage because there isn't any. It's full of kufr, it's full of disbelief, and it's full of twisted beliefs. Now don't get me wrong, the Ash'aris are much, much, much less severe than any of these guys and much closer to the Sunnah. But the reality is, this morphing and changing is not coming from the Aqeedah of the Prophet ﷺ. It is coming from the Aqeedah of the Christians and the Greeks. And at this point here, at version 3 of the Mu'tazila, or version 4, Greek philosophy gets translated, the Abbasids come along, and things start to get really messy because they start to have a real, basis with which to attack the Muslims. And they're attacking them based on the arguments presented in Greek philosophy. And at the end of the day, Greek philosophy came along to support this early innovation in Islam. And so this is what we wanted to talk about today, a little bit of history of deviancy in Islam, where it came from. All of these groups, trace them back one way or another, and you find none of them came from anything good. Either they came from the people who killed Ali, or either they came from the people who exaggerated regarding Ali and hated the Sahaba, or either they came from the people who Abdullah ibn Umar said about them, I am free from them and they are free from me, or either they came from the people who took their knowledge from a Christian monk in Damascus. None of that has any good. The Khawarij, the killers of Ali, the Shia who exaggerated regarding Ali, the Mu'tazila who learned from John of Damascus, and the Qadariyah who Abdullah ibn Umar said, I am free from them and they are free from me. These are the four who essentially all of the other groups came from them. All of the other groups came from them. And if you want, you can put the Jahmiyyah in there as well. And the Jahmiyyah can be sort of considered to be, if you like, a founder or a founding part of the Mu'tazila in some ways. So you have sort of 5 groups. And these groups are essentially the heads of innovation in Islam. And this innovation has come through them. And then other figures came along, mixed it with a bit of the Sunnah, bit of Bid'ah, mix it all up together, we have a new madhab. Take that, bit more Sunnah, bit more Bid'ah, take it from someone else, mix it up, we have a different madhab. And we see all of these, and by madhab I don't mean the madhahib of fiqh, Hanafi, Hanbali, Shafi, I'm talking about madhahib of Aqeedah. Your madhab in Aqeedah as in the Mu'tazila, the Khawarij, the Shia, and so on and so forth. And so essentially none of these come from the Sunnah. And that's what we want to emphasize in concluding today, that there was a belief set that came all the way up from here, from the Prophet ﷺ, supported by Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali and the rest of the Sahaba. And that lived on and lives on until today. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, there will always remain a group of my ummah upon the truth, in clear, manifest upon the truth, clear upon the truth. They will not be harmed by those who oppose them until the affair of Allah comes and they remain upon the same belief. How do we know what that belief is? It is the belief that the Prophet ﷺ taught, the belief that Abu Bakr taught, that Umar, that Uthman, that Ali radiallahu anhu, the rest of the Sahaba taught, not the belief of John of Damascus, not the belief of Wasil ibn Ata, or Jahm ibn Safwan, or Amr ibn Ubayd, or the Qadariyah, or the Asha'ira, or the Maturidiyah, or any of those other groups. It is the belief that goes all the way up to the Prophet ﷺ, and you can prove it from him. And from the Prophet ﷺ, of course, it came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran and in the Sunnah, and this is the belief. As for the name for this belief, there is no name for this belief. You can call it whatever you like, you can call it many names, any name you like. But the reality is that this belief is the belief that our Aqeedah is the Quran and the Sunnah and the understanding of the companions. The Quran, the Sunnah, and the understanding of the companions. You want to call that whatever you want to call it. Some people call it good names. Some people insult you and call it bad names. Some people call it all sorts of things. But the reality is, if your belief comes from the Quran and the Sunnah in accordance with the belief of the companions, then you are on the right path. And if it comes from anywhere else, any of these guys here, look where it ends up. A Christian monk. Or it ends up with a Hindu priest. Or it ends up with a Buddhist, because the Maturidiyah were influenced after their little bit of bid'ah that they threw in, after they'd sort of come a bit closer to the Sunnah, they threw a bit of Buddhism in there. So just to mix it up a bit, they decided to throw Buddhism into the mix. So there's all sorts of religious influences. But when we take our belief from the Prophet ﷺ, Quran, Sunnah, companions, this belief is solid, it's strong, and it will remain bi'idhnillahi ta'ala until Yawm al-Qiyamah, as the Prophet ﷺ said. Now, inshallah, what I'd like to do, just to finish off, is rather than us have a break because we have only 20 minutes left, I would just like us to just jump straight into the last session. 20 minutes only, inshallah ta'ala. If not, still we're gonna try and finish on time, because we would like, people we promised that they would go at 5, and maybe they've organised people to pick them up or whatever. Inshallah, we're going to try not to, extend it too long, but inshallah, whatever's easy. Questions, alhamdulillah, they're not a problem. So we just want to spend 5 minutes before the question and answer session, just recapping what it is that we've learned and what it is that we have taken moving forward. We began by talking about what Aqeedah is, and we've become, familiar with the topic, what it contains and what it doesn't contain. We've understood the sources for Aqeedah, the Quran and the Sunnah and the Ijma', and we talked a little bit about what consensus means and what it doesn't mean. The most important thing we did is to talk about La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, what that means to say La ilaha illallah, that it means that you worship Allah alone and you disbelieve in the worship of anything that is worshipped besides Allah. We talked about what worship is and what worship isn't. And we talked about some of the points that are discussed in Aqeedah. Not by any means all of them, but we talked about some of them. And if you want to expand your knowledge of Aqeedah, there are a number of books that you can use. I highly recommend a couple of books. One which basically deals with session 2. Okay, and this book deals with session 2 primarily. I have a book for you for session 2 and a book for you for session 3. And the rest I'm going to leave for session 4 is this video here that we did. So the book for session 2 is The Fundamentals of Tawheed. By Dr. Bilal Phillips. And again, Dr. Bilal Phillips is a human being. We do not, take his book as being, this is the Quran summarized or something like that, but it's a good book. And it's a generally correct and valid book that tells you about what we discussed in session 2 in a little bit more detail. As for what we discussed in session 3, I'm going to recommend to you the book of Al-Imam Al-Barbahari. They call it just the Creed, because it's not called the Creed in Arabic. In Arabic it's called the Explanation of the Sunnah. but it's simply called The Creed by Imam al-Barbahari. By Imam al-Barbahari. And this basically goes over more advanced topics of creed, like we talked about, the belief about the Sahaba, the belief about the disobedient Muslim, the belief about the Quran, the belief about theology and philosophy. Some of that in a very simple form is covered in that book. As for session 4, you can watch that video, which is a video by Dr. Yasir Qadi, and it's called, I have to get the name properly because it's difficult to find. It's called Knowledge of God, Intuition, or something like that. Can we get it?
Knowledge of God, Reason, and Nature, Revelation, and Intuition.
That'll do. Knowing God,
Reason, Revelation, and Intuition.
Reason, Revelation, and Intuition. And that doesn't deal with the whole of what we covered today. Al-Barbahari doesn't deal with everything we dealt with in session 3. Tawheed doesn't deal with everything we dealt with in session 2. And this video doesn't deal with what we dealt with, everything we dealt with in session 4. But they're good reading that you can build upon, and hopefully you can identify and understand the video Knowing God, Reason, Revelation, and Intuition, which was pretty good. It's pretty advanced, some of the topics, but it's pretty easy to understand as well in some ways. As for the history of the different sects and groups, I don't know a great book in English that goes through the early history of the companions. I know Dar es Salaam have brought out some regarding the biography of Ali and the history, and so you can find some information if you look for some of the books by Dar es Salaam publications on the history of. As-Salabi. As-Salabi has another book here. As-Salabi has a number of books. He has a biography of Ali, and I think he has a biography of Uthman as well.
He's got all four. The main one you see, of Abu Bakr and Ali.
He has a biography of the 4 Khulafa. You may find in that some information about the early days, but you might not find sort of like everything that you're looking for. But inshallah, this is what we do. We gather together information from the books and we try and present it to you. In the 3rd session, we dealt with obviously the Sahaba. We dealt with some of what happened. We dealt with our beliefs in more detail, and we dealt with some of the more sort of tricky issues, the belief regarding Allah and the issue of putting your intellect ahead of the revelation. And then in the 4th session we heard a little bit about the history of deviancy in Islam, where deviancy came in, the fact that deviancy exists in every point of Aqeedah. There is a group or a person who took an opinion that was different from the mainstream, and how our Aqeedah has survived through the Hadith, the Quran, the Sunnah, and the narrations from the companions radiallahu anhum wa ardahum. And we talked a little bit about the foundation of sort of philosophical thought in Islam, or reasoning in Islam, which came from the Mu'tazila, the Jahmiyyah, the denial of Allah's attributes, the Khawarij and the Shia, and then later on some of the more modern groups like the Asha'ira and the Maturidiyya, and where they got their influences from. And again, there's a lot more to read about that, but that gives you a foundation. And again, the purpose of this is to be as factual as possible, not to offend anybody, but inshallah to be as factual as possible, and to look at these issues in the light of what they really are, and to look at the sort of where the beliefs came from in the light of what they really were. And again, obviously we're going to present what we consider to be the Quran, the Sunnah. And inshallah, what I would only like you to do in terms of judging what I said is to judge it against the Quran and the Sunnah, not to judge it against the opinion of the likes of someone like, for example, to judge it against the opinion of a modern book or whatever, but to judge what I said against the Quran and the Sunnah and against the statements of the companions, and whatever I said agrees with that, then you're welcome to take it, and whatever I've said that doesn't agree with that, then it needs more questioning and it needs more research, inshallah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Right, that's taken up sort of 10 minutes, and in terms of moving forward, I think the most important thing for you guys is to look at how you apply this to your own life, to look at your own belief, to look at the belief, where your source for that belief is, who you've learned from. Is it your parents? Is it your local masjid? And where that belief has actually come from, and to start to read and purify it. And some people said that one of the greatest ways of honouring your parents is not to copy their mistakes. Because if you copy the mistake of your parents, for example, just because they were who they were, you copy the mistake that they make, at the end of the day you increase in their sin in the sight of Allah. Right? Because they have instigated a sin and you've copied it. So how do you do birrul walidain? How do you be honourable to your parents? You be honourable by practicing the truth and teaching the truth. And the truth is not what Muhammad Tim says, but it is what the Quran says and the Sunnah says and the companions radiallahu anhum say. And inshallah, in this way, you are honouring your parents and your ancestors, and you're not disgracing them by doing bad things and then having them share some of the sins in you continuing from their mistakes. So that's an important point about the justification. Well, I can't go against what my parents believe. And then, for you to look at it, for you to correct it, that every time you come across a point of Aqeedah that differs from what you used to believe, you find, is it in the Quran, is it in the Sunnah? If it is, you take it, then inshallah ta'ala you'll be successful. And then of course tawbah from whatever we've done that is wrong. And that's more or less, inshallah, the end of the sessions for me, and I'll open it up to questions and answers. I don't think we're going to be kicked out of the room immediately or anything, but I know people have car parking and stuff like that to deal with. So question and answers, guys, it's entirely up to you. Those who want to stay, ahlan wa sahlan, you're welcome. Those who want to leave, as long as you do so quietly, you're more than welcome to do so, inshallah. We'll take one from the brothers, one from the sisters, back and forward, inshallah. And if I think the question is particularly long, we might have to skip it and deal with it in written form or post it on the ISOC Facebook page or something. But inshallah, we try to deal with the questions that we can deal with in the time. Hamza.
Can I ask you, session 5, are we going to postpone it? Or?
No, session 5, more or less I covered what I wanted to talk about. Because I said in session 5 I wanted to talk about moving forward. And I thought that it was enough to talk for 20 minutes about applying it to your life, about not looking at mistakes, about moving forward, about the Quran, the Sunnah, and about recapping what we've done. I think that's enough for what I wanted to cover for session 5, inshallah. Right, we take a question from the brothers, first of all. Any questions? Do you have any questions from the sisters?
I wanted to ask about the study of kalam, the theory based on rationality. Because I thought the word kalam means speech. Is that the same kalam that is referred to in Ajrumiyya, or is that something else?
Okay, kalam. When we see the word kalam referred to in books like of Arabic language, like al-Ajrumiyya, is it the same kalam that's referred to here? No. What we refer to, kalam in Arabic means speech. And kalam specifically in the language of the Arabs is a speech that has a meaning to it. Yeah, so al-kalam is defined in Arabic as a sound that has a meaning to it. Or a sound that comes out of your mouth that has a meaning to it, something like that. And this sort of sound that you make that has a sort of meaning to it, this is one thing. On the other side, what we're talking about here is what is called ilmul kalam. And ilmul kalam is a branch or a different type of philosophy which is basically to do with basing your religion upon rational thinking rather than basing it upon the texts of the Quran and the Sunnah. And this is what we've been talking about here. The two have the same word, but they have different meanings. This kalam is just general speech, and there's nothing wrong with it. Kalamun Nabi, the kalam of the Prophet ﷺ. But the kalam we're talking about here is a science which sprung out from philosophy, which uses intellect and rationality as a basis for religion. Question from the brothers?
Jazakallah khairan for your lectures. I've got a question, about La ilaha illallah, Sheikh. There's a condition which is I have got, like, in my knowledge, which is somebody who has to intentionally have in mind to declare that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad, Messenger of Allah, and condition that, inshallah, one day bring back Ummah. By doing that, as you mentioned, you have to avoid this kind of stuff. So, by declaring, bringing Ummah back by intention that al-hukm for Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Inna hukmu lillah. That's hukm, the rule has to be the rule of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And
I mean, the hukm, we have to be careful.
Yes, I just try to make a link.
I'll make a point. This is the same point that has a justification for everything in Islam, because this word was used by the Khawarij as the reason why they killed Ali. When he said, why did you kill Ali? They said, in al-hukmu illa lillah. And Ali said, this is true, but you want evil from it.
Yeah, I was trying to make that additional to your speech. Also, there's a link between this, what you just mentioned, alhamdulillah, all the people who avoid this kind of bid'ahs and has a, salaf way, inshallah. There's some debate between abide your ruler. Back to Sheikh Albani, rahimahullah. I just want to support my questions, that's why I bring their name. Sheikh Albani, rahimahullah, said in one his statement that against Sheikh Madkhali, that he said Syria, before this revolution, Syria and Iraq, you should, the Ba'siyah, the group al-Ba'siyah, does not matter, you have to avoid them. Does not matter killing Muslim and destroying the mosques. So Sheikh Albani, in his video, which is published on YouTube, against his what he actually stated, and he said you have to check
right, I'll deal with that. Yeah. Let me deal, because otherwise we're going to be here all day.
Okay, just
I will deal with two things you mentioned, and that's it. We'll talk about the rest privately. Otherwise, we can be here all day. Right? The first thing is the conditions for La ilaha illallah. This is very beneficial. The first condition of La ilaha illallah is knowledge. The second condition is certainty. The third condition is acceptance. The fourth condition is submission. The fifth condition is truthfulness. The sixth condition is sincerity. And the seventh condition is love. 7 conditions for La ilaha illallah, of which you mentioned sincerity, and I think that was a beneficial point. I want to mention that to everyone. Knowledge. You have to know what you say when you say La ilaha illallah. Just the fact that you say La ilaha illallah is not enough. You have to know what it is when you say La ilaha illallah, what it actually means. So you have to know it. Certainty. You have to be sure in it. You can't say, well, I'm saying La ilaha illallah because I'm hedging my bets. If I say La ilaha illallah and it's true, I'll go to paradise. If I say La ilaha illallah and it's wrong, I won't go to hellfire. No problem. This is not allowed. It has to be based with certainty. Acceptance. You have to accept what it entails. There's no point saying La ilaha illallah and then going and sacrificing to other than Allah. You have to accept what it entails. Submission. You have to submit to it in Islam. It's no good saying La ilaha illallah and then not being a Muslim. You have to say it and you have to submit to it. Truthfulness. You have to be truthful in what you say, that you're actually not lying. You actually really mean what you're saying. Sincerity. It has to be for Allah alone, not because your parents want you to be Muslim, not because your family wants you to be Muslim. And likewise, you have to have the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is your guide and which is your primary reason for doing everything. Regarding your point on the Ba'athiyah and Iraq and Syria, this is a very good point. And I deliberately didn't want to get into mentioning countries. I did mention, however, Bashar al-Assad, and I did mention that he was a disbeliever without any disagreement in Islam. But rebelling against a disbeliever has conditions. So we're going to write down the conditions
try to say
for rebelling against a disbeliever. So let's imagine that there is a disbelieving Muslim ruler who's completely left Islam, like Bashar al-Assad. The first condition is ability. You must be able to rebel. Not simply that, you and me and two of the brothers are going to go and rebel against him, and we're going to get ourselves killed and lots of other people killed. You have to have the military ability to do it. Number two, you have to have the ability or a plan to put an Islamic ruler in place. Why? If you rebel against Bashar al-Assad and you replace Bashar al-Assad with democracy, you've just replaced one type of kufr with another type of kufr. You have not replaced kufr with Islam, and so you haven't done anything in the sight of Allah, because Islam came to remove evil or to reduce it. But if you replace Bashar al-Assad with Bashar al-Assad version 2, you have just replaced evil with evil. But if you put an Islamic ruler in place, then yes, that is good. And the third one, that the positive consequences outweigh the negative. So for example, I would ask you, are the number of people in Syria who are dying today worth it for removing Bashar al-Assad in the context of being able to put someone Muslim in place and the ability to do so? That's not a question I'm going to answer. I'm going to leave that with you to think about. But this is an important point. You have to have the ability to remove him. So you have armies, like you see the Free Syrian Army, they have an army to remove him with. It's not just like two guys who just decided we're going to remove him. They have to be able to put a Muslim ruler in place, and they have to think that the positive consequences outweigh the negative. This goes back to who? Not you and me, this goes back to the scholars in Islam, the senior people, and what we call Ahlul Halli wal Aqd. And Ahlul Halli wal Aqd are those people who together they govern a country. So if you imagine the generals of the army, the head of the, some of the people who are leaving Bashar al-Assad now and joining the other side, the generals, the leaders, like the heads of the parliament, the speaker of the parliament, the head of this, these senior people, along with the scholars, and we would say sort of senior power brokers, if you like. These are the two people in the Quran who are mentioned as having the authority to declare this rebellion. The scholars and the senior power brokers, those people who hold the power in the country. We call them in Arabic Ahlul Halli wal Aqd, the people who control the power in the country. Those and the scholars, they are the ones who have the ability to decide this. But we can look at a situation and say, maybe it's changed. Maybe in the beginning we wouldn't have said to people, rebel against him. But now, what choice do they have? If they don't rebel against him, he's going to take everybody. So, maybe now we can say that it's better to rebel. But the point is that these issues are difficult and they're complicated. What I'm trying to give you are principles, not specific situations. So I'm not talking about any country specifically, but we're talking about there are conditions for rebelling against a disbelieving ruler, and those conditions are well established in the Quran and in the Sunnah. Well, yeah. Right. You can make as many announcements as you want. Any last questions? Anything really urgent anyone wants to say?
My question is about the deviance. Some people, they don't have the knowledge to know these things and their sources. So you have to have one of your scholar or one of the leader of your community to lead you. So what?
I said that there's nothing wrong with taking help from somebody. But you can't turn around to Allah on the Day of Judgment and say, I believe in this because this guy told me. You have to have your own belief for yourself. And Allah doesn't require for you to have all of the knowledge of Islam today. But that every time you learn something is true from the Quran or the Sunnah, you stick to it, and you try not to go against it with your opinion or with anything else. Inshallah, if you do this, Allah will save you from all of the this deviancy and these issues, inshallah. So it's important, yeah, there's no doubt we need help. I mean, today, I was a reason, inshallah, to sort of help you guys to understand these points. But I'm not telling you to take them from me blindly. I'm telling you that each of you have to be convinced with the argument yourselves, and each of you have to come to the truth yourselves, and whatever you find from the sunnah, accept it, and whatever you find goes against the sunnah, then we don't accept it, inshallah ta'ala. Okay guys, inshallah, we wrap it up for there. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.